It has made clothing cheaper, faster, and more accessible than at any other point in human history. Today, millions of people can buy the latest trends seen on the runways of Paris, Milan, London, or New York just weeks ago for the price of a cup of coffee. Yet, this very industry has also become one of the most controversial on the planet. Why? Because fast fashion isn't just about cheap clothes, it's a highly optimized economic engine, a system designed to slash the time between design, production, and retail, all while driving prices down to the absolute minimum. Historically, fashion moved in seasons. Brands spent months planning, designing, and manufacturing spring/summer or autumn/winter collections. Fast fashion broke that calendar. Today, brands can replicate a viral trend from social media or the runway and put it on store shelves in a matter of weeks. The result? A relentless cycle of hyperproduction and hyperconsumption. From a purely economic standpoint, it's a masterpiece. Faster production, lower costs, higher sales. But every economic model comes with a cost. And some costs don't show up on the price tag. So the real question of this video isn't whether fast fashion is good or bad. The questions we need to ask are, how did this business model completely disrupt a century-old industry? What actually makes these clothes so impossibly cheap? And most importantly, who is paying the real price for this economic success? In this video, we're going to look behind the curtain, strip away the bias, and look at the hard data, the global supply chains, and the hidden costs that make fast fashion one of the most complex phenomena of the modern economy. If you ask most people what the secret behind fast fashion is, you'll probably hear answers like cheap labor, large factories, or famous brands. But the reality goes much deeper than that. The secret of fast fashion lies neither in a factory in Bangladesh, nor in a European brand, nor even in a cheap t-shirt. It lies in an economic system that has evolved over more than 2 centuries and transformed the way the world manufactures goods. The roots of this story go back more than 250 years, to a book that changed the course of the global economy. In 1776, Scottish economist Adam Smith introduced an idea in The Wealth of Nations that would later become one of the foundations of modern economics: the division of labor. Using his famous pin factory example, Smith showed that when workers specialize in a single task, instead of completing every step of production themselves, productivity rises dramatically. The result is greater output at a lower cost. This idea transformed the Industrial Revolution, but fast fashion took this concept far beyond the walls of a single factory. An idea that once simply improved the productivity of one factory has now become one of the driving forces behind the global economy. Today, the division of labor no longer exists only among workers inside a factory. In many ways, the entire world has become one giant factory. Think about a simple t-shirt. The cotton may have been grown in India or the United States. The fibers may have been spun into yarn in another country. The fabric may have been dyed in China or Turkey. The final stitching may have taken place in Bangladesh or Vietnam. Then that same t-shirt may travel thousands of kilometers before finally appearing on a store shelf in London, New York, or Paris. By the time it reaches your hands, it may have crossed several countries and traveled tens of thousands of kilometers. That is the power of the global supply chain. A system where every stage of production takes place, wherever it can be done, with the greatest advantage in terms of expertise, speed, or cost. But this raises an important question. If fast fashion brands generate billions of dollars in revenue, why don't many of them even own the factories that produce their clothes? The answer lies in another economic decision: outsourcing. Instead of investing in their own factories, most major brands outsource manufacturing to hundreds of independent suppliers across different countries. They focus their own resources on design, market analysis, branding, marketing, and distribution. This allows them to rapidly increase or reduce production as consumer demand changes, without carrying the enormous costs of owning and operating factories. But the global supply chain is only part of the story. There is another powerful force that drives costs even lower: economies of scale. When a company produces millions of garments instead of just a few thousand, expenses such as design, advertising, transportation, and even raw material purchasing are spread across far more products. As a result, the cost of producing each individual garment falls. At the same time, advances in technology, sophisticated logistics systems, real-time sales data, and differences in production costs across countries all reinforce this business model. So the success of fast fashion is not the result of a single factor. It is the combination of several powerful economic ideas, division of labor, global supply chains, outsourcing, economies of scale, and data-driven management. Together, these ideas have made fast fashion one of the most efficient production systems in the modern economy. But in economics, no advantage comes without a cost. Some of those costs have simply been shifted out of the consumer's sight, costs that never appear on a clothing price tag. In the next section, we'll uncover those hidden costs. In economics, there is a concept called externalities. It describes how some of the real consequences of an economic activity are not included in the final price of a product, but are instead transferred somewhere else, to the environment, local communities, or even future generations. For example, when a factory produces a product, costs such as raw materials, labor, and transportation are usually included in the final price. But if that same process creates water pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, or environmental damage, those impacts often never appear on the price tag. In the fast fashion industry, this issue becomes much more visible. A simple t-shirt may cost only a few dollars in a store. Before reaching the consumer, it travels through a long and complex journey, from growing cotton and producing fibers to dyeing, manufacturing, packaging, global transportation, storage, and retail. Every stage of this chain creates impacts that are not always reflected in the final price of the product. One of the most significant hidden impacts of the fashion industry is water consumption. Producing textiles, especially during dyeing and finishing processes, requires enormous amounts of water. For example, producing a single cotton t-shirt requires around 2,700 liters of water. That is roughly the amount of water one person drinks over more than 2.5 years. In regions where water resources are limited, this level of consumption can place serious pressure on ecosystems and local communities. But water is not the only issue. Textile production requires various chemicals for dyeing and processing fabrics. When these substances are not properly managed, they can enter water systems and affect surrounding ecosystems. In some textile-producing regions, rivers that once supported local communities now struggle with the consequences of industrial wastewater. But the story does not end at the factory. A single piece of clothing may travel thousands of kilometers through a global production and distribution network, from raw materials to factories, warehouses, and finally retail stores. This long journey creates a hidden carbon footprint, an environmental impact that rarely appears on the price tag. Perhaps the biggest challenge of fast fashion is not only cheap production, but rapid consumption. When clothing becomes cheaper and easier to access, the cycle of buying and discarding also accelerates. The result is a massive volume of clothing that is used for a short time before leaving the consumer cycle. According to global estimates, more than 90 million tons of textile waste are generated worldwide every year. A significant portion of these clothes ends up in landfills or shipped to second-hand markets in other countries. Ultimately, fast fashion creates a major economic contradiction. System designed to make clothing faster, cheaper, and more efficient is also creating enormous pressures through resource consumption, pollution, and waste. And this leads to a bigger question. If such significant consequences exist behind these low prices, why do millions of people around the world continue to buy fast fashion at such a rapid pace? To find the answer, we must step away from factories and supply chains and venture into a far more complex territory, the human mind. This is the world of behavioral economics, the field that explores why people do not always make decisions based solely on logic and economic self-interest. Traditional economics generally assumes that people make rational decisions. They gather information, compare alternatives, and ultimately choose the option that maximizes their economic benefit. But real people do not always make decisions this way. We do not shop only to satisfy practical needs. Sometimes we buy things to feel better, to shape the image we have of ourselves, or to feel that we belong to a community or a broader cultural movement. Fast fashions come by understanding and leveraging these very human tendencies. Imagine buying a new piece of clothing. Its value may not lie only in the fabric, the stitching, or its practical use. Sometimes what you are really buying is a feeling of novelty, a sense of change, a fresh start, or a renewed version of yourself. But there is another powerful force, the desire to be seen. Today, clothing is more than something we wear. It is part of the message we send to others. It signals our taste, the groups we identify with, and how we want to be perceived. Social media has amplified this effect dramatically. Every day, millions of images featuring celebrities, influencers, and emerging styles are shared online. Trends spread at unprecedented speed, and many people feel they must constantly keep up to stay connected with today's digital and cultural landscape. This is where FOMO, fear of missing out, comes into play. The fear of missing a new style, the fear of falling behind the latest trends, and sometimes the fear of becoming disconnected from the social and cultural world around us. In the past, fashion changed mainly with the seasons. Today, however, a trend can appear on social media in the morning and find its way into millions of wardrobes just days later. Fast fashion has dramatically shortened that timeline. But how? By combining rapid production, data, and a deep understanding of consumer behavior. Major brands analyze what people are searching for, which colors are becoming popular, which styles are gaining momentum on social media, and which products are most likely to sell. They then transform those insights into new products at remarkable speed. The result is a powerful cycle. A new trend emerges. People become interested in it, brands rapidly produce it. The new products flood social media once again, and the cycle begins all over again. Meets human psychology. Fast fashion. This is where the economics of production does not simply sell clothing. It also sells experiences, change, a sense of belonging, and the feeling of being seen. But one point is essential. This is not a story about blaming consumers. People make decisions within a system shaped by prices, advertising, technology, algorithms, and modern culture. Fast fashion is powered by two forces: the economic engine of production and the psychological engine of consumption. And perhaps it is this combination that has made it one of the most powerful business models in the fashion industry. After examining every aspect of fast fashion, one final question remains: is this economic model fundamentally flawed? The answer is not simple. On one hand, fast fashion has made clothing more accessible and created jobs for millions of people. But on the other hand, it carries hidden costs that are never reflected in the final price of the clothes. However, changing such a system is not simple. Slowing down this industry without careful planning could affect millions of jobs and livelihoods, especially in developing countries. For this reason, the future of fast fashion is likely not about eliminating it completely, but about finding a new balance: affordable prices, efficient production, and greater responsibility. Ultimately, the story of fast fashion is not only about clothing. It is about a much larger question in the modern economy. When a product becomes cheaper and more accessible, who pays the costs that are not included in its final price? Perhaps the answer lies in a combination of all three: consumers, companies, and policymakers. Because economics is not only about production and consumption. It is about the choices we make today and the future we create through those choices.